Thank you all for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I was very positively surprised to see so many people. It's a completely full room. As you said, I'm Håvard. I work as basically a BIM manager, design technologist at Snøhetta in Oslo. My company is we are around 120 people: architects, landscape architects, engineers, designers in Oslo. We have offices in San Francisco, New York City, in Innsbruck here in Austria, and we have also single people working out of Adelaide, Australia, and Singapore, Stockholm. Yeah, that's basically it. The reason why I have come here to be with you today is to talk a little bit about how we approach BIM in Snøhetta and how we approach BIM in Norway. So first, to give you kind of like a backdrop of Snøhetta, my company, the company that I work for. We were founded in 1989 by winning the competition of the library in Alexandria. We have a very strong connection between landscape and buildings, because originally the company was founded by landscape architects and building architects collaborating. And this was not so common in the 80s in Norway. There were usually landscape office and building office. So we have a very strong cross-disciplinary connection between those areas, and in the last 10, 15 years, our company's approach to cross-disciplinary design has expanded to including engineering, brand design, and also technology development like I'm doing. The name Snøhetta is one of the mountain peaks of the Dovre Mountains in Norway. You go to this desolate place with only stone rockets and where the trolls live, according to Norwegian myth. And the reason why we're called Snøhetta is that the founders of Snøhetta, they had their first office on the second floor above a bar in Oslo called Dovre. So it's like the link to the mountaintop. And we, by design, does not have the name of one of the founders. It's a flat structure, and inside the office, if you go to see me in Vippetangen in Oslo, you go into the office, you will see a great big hall. We have one room. Everybody is sitting together in the same room. We're sitting completely randomized, which means that no team or department or leadership or people working together every day are not sitting together. So we're sitting right next to people whom we're not working together with. And this is also very specifically designed to make the flow of information and knowledge and inspiration go across teams, to not build clusters, but to have like a big group of people operating together. And this is kind of important for me working in BIM, because this is very important for a design team. A design team's ability to succeed using building information modeling technologies is to have this flow of information across the teams. This picture is taken from the Dovre Mountain. Every year we walk uphill over stones and bad weather, and go to this trip together to enjoy times and looking over the Dovre Mountains where we kind of come from. We have a very open office. This picture is from a class of school, from high school, a bunch of kids coming in. We have every week, we have like 2-3 school classes coming into our office. We show them around the workshop. I give them a presentation, or Paul gives them a presentation about what we're doing. And we have guests from all over the world coming to the office every day. So if any of you are going to Oslo, you come and knock on the door, and I will show you the KUKA robot and what we're doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about our processes. Our processes as a design company does not only include BIM at all. We're doing a lot of different things. And the approach to what we're doing is very, how do you say, like, it has two opposites that's very connected, like this dual mindset of up and down, yin and yang. We have the analog workflows and the digital workflows. And in the crossover of these two ways of operating is very interesting to see how we develop our projects. This is just one example of a small concept store in Oslo that's supposed to be selling hearing equipment like noise cancelling headsets and gadgets for people who need to expand their level of hearing. So a lot of these, you can see the outer walls kind of have this like wave-like shapes. And for one of these, inside there's the storage is going to be a bench where you can like pick up this noise-canceling headsets and move around, and it's going to have like this wave-like shape. So to do this, we model in some kind of simple model, maybe in Rhino, and then we model different versions of this quickly in Rhino, apply the 3D shapes and the materials, and then usually we move everything into the workshop where we have different tools for creating physical models, which is very important to how we work. We have two 3D printers, a laser cutter, and a KUKA robot that can make something like this that we bring to the meetings with the clients, or so that they can feel and touch it. It's a different way you perceive something in the world if you can feel and touch it than just looking at it inside a computer. So this is important to how we work. At the same time, we do completely analog things, like this reception wall behind a conference center in the north of Norway. That's the first time I saw this video, I thought, wow, 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 what kind of grasshopper script is making this? And then it turns out that it's my German friend Julian Price, who is actually our biggest grasshopper expert. He just took his hammer in the workshop and bent a couple of aluminium tubes into this, and then he recorded it with his iPhone, which I think is super interesting. So it can be anything. And if you walk around our office, you will see this. It's like a mausoleum, like a library of just models from 30 years. Everything we produce, we don't throw anything. If I make some kind of model for the Le Monde in Paris or for the BLF in Beirut or whatever, it gets stored all around the office, under desk or behind the counter or in some kind of obscure meeting room that no one is using. You will see all these models like kind of a memory of what we've been doing. So that's important, the crossover between the digital and the analog. I'm going to show you a couple of projects also that we've been doing before I started working at Snøhetta. We won the Library of Alexandria in '89. That was like that was when Snøhetta started. And the next big project that we won that kind of formed the company like it is today was the Norwegian Opera and Ballet in Oslo. It's located 2-minute walk from my office, right next to the main train station. Did any of you go there? Yeah, a couple of people. It's when you're making a monumental building, usually what happens is you make maybe some kind a castle like this, or a big church, or something that's going to make you feel small and the building is big, or the king is big and you're small, and kind of you're surrounded by this awe of greatness when you go to something monumental. And for the Norwegian Opera and Ballet in Norway, my colleagues, they wanted to make something different. A monumental building that the people owned, where you can be inside the building, you can go on top of the building, and you can be on the building. And this is a rhythm that's being repeated in every Snøhetta project. Every project you will see, all the way from the 80s until now, we are creating places for people to be, public space. You will see this over and over again in everything I'm going to talk about today. So the opera is public space. You can walk on top of it. You can be on the roof. It's for tourists, for everyone, it's public. You can go into the opera. It's completely open for everyone. And so many times I was there. I've been standing inside the lobby of the opera, like 2 feet from the Norwegian Crown Prince, just being there among the people, and it's very open. I really like this. Which this picture also shows, is the people own this building. It's not the state. It's completely opposite to the city hall of Oslo, if you've ever been there, which is like completely closed, humongous towers, and completely closed to the public. So this is different, and I really like this. This is the Norwegian Reindeer Pavilion in the Dovre Mountains. This is where the picture that I showed you earlier with the people laughing is from inside. This is the Dovre Mountain. It's a super cool project. Tiny, 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 small budget. An interesting interior that was modeled in Autodesk Maya and then sent to boat fabricators on the western coast of Norway for manufacturing by robot. And is also part of this like yin-yang thing about the project in Snøhetta. We have huge projects in Saudi Arabia, and we have small projects on the obscure parts of the world. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, maybe our most crazy project, this is the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture in Saudi Arabia. It's in the Aramco area, just north of Abu Dhabi or Bahrain or somewhere. It has an insane shape. I think this was actually the first project that we ever used BIM, which is not easy. I think it was actually a nightmare. I think some people really, got sick by trying to model this thing in BIM, which is not something to make a joke about, but still, whoa, not a nice first thing to. You don't learn Revit doing this. But it's an amazing building. The building is inspired by the Roman Ark, and the key here is to understand that a society is formed by different stones. If you take away one of the stones, the shape collapses, like the Roman Ark. And this is a cultural building, so the idea is for the people to understand that if you take away culture, which is the keystone, one of the keystones in this building, the society collapses. And this is also a very special building to us because it's in Saudi Arabia and it is public. And public space in Saudi Arabia is not very simple. But this was also allowed because of the building's connection to the oil industry, and the oil industry in Saudi Arabia may be a little bit more liberal than the other parts. So and this is a picture from before Christmas. It's almost finished. It's going to be completed by the end of the year, and it already had like an official opening. And it's crazy to see, for us in Snøhetta, to see the rendering and the picture of this building today, which is almost the same. The facade is crazy. It's like 600 kilometers of aluminium tubes of this diameter, all digitally modeled with Grasshopper and exported to robots that just pours out meter after meter of aluminium tube that's completely custom shaped to the entire building and shaped around. Until the most obscure, small, crazy project. I don't think you can even see it, but it is a Snøhetta project. And it's the owner, founder of Snøhetta, even draw this. It's a small, tiny cabin in the middle of the western mountains of Norway. So we have a huge diversity in building size, publicity, economics, everything. Everything from analog to digital, the most advanced, the most simple, like Stone Age technology. I find this very fascinating. So from this idea of what Snøhetta is, I'm going to move over to talk a little bit about what BIM is like in Norway, what the everyday life for an architect working with building information modeling in Norway, and where we come from. For me personally, this was interesting because I think I became an engineer in 2003. My first job involved doing reinforcement detailing in AutoCAD LT and bending schedules in Excel, and which was nice to have a job, but it was a nightmare workflow because every time something changed, I had to do this like manual work. A few years later, someone came to me and said, I have this thing called Revit, and then I think in 2005 this was. So I started learning this program, and my first big ventures into the building information modeling world was these buildings, which is the barcode buildings right next to the Opera in Oslo. I was working at the time for an Autodesk reseller, and I worked as a consultant on the, does this thing have a pointer? Yeah. These three buildings to the right. This one, this one, this one, and I'm going to help you guys also. These three buildings. I worked for the structural engineer, and they had never used Revit before, so, but because the architect wanted to use Revit. And this is interesting. The architect wanted to use Revit because Norway has a strong oil industry. The oil in Norway is in the sea. And when you're getting oil from the sea into the barrels and on land, you're very limited in space. So the oil industry developed in Norway in the 50s and 60s. They were very limited in space. Everything had to be planned. You know this. I heard also the ship industry, everything that's going to space. When you don't have space, you are very dependent on planning everything perfectly before you order one single piece of steel. So the guy, the architect working actually on this project, he came from the oil industry. He worked in engineer in Norconsult, and then he went into architecture because he wanted to model glass. And then, you know, the personal initiative here is key on this project because he wanted to do Revit. And then the engineer came and said to me, we want to do Revit, can you help us? And I helped them. And then this was one of the first buildings, these 3 buildings, and the one actually also to the left that you will see in the skyline of Oslo when you come there, were the first major buildings using building information modeling technologies in Norway. And it came from, not from ownership, not from the client, not from owner, not from contractor, but it came from personal initiatives inside one person and the architect. And then using, again, the yin-yang, the dualism, you have motivations for using BIM coming from completely other side. The owner, the building owner of the airports in Norway, Avinor, they decided to build another extension to the airport in Gardermoen in Oslo. And the team developing this, the architect, the engineer, and the technical engineers, the contractors, and everyone, they were it was a requirement from the owner that they were going to use not only BIM, but open BIM, which means IFC files for information exchange, and also to be sitting in the same location. So all these guys, the architects from Nordic, the engineers from Moss Jacobsen, the engineers from Norconsult, everyone, they even formed a new company. So all these companies, they went together and formed a new company where they all shared the same responsibilities and risk. And then they moved to Gardermoen. I think their office is somewhere south of the airport, and are sitting together now for almost 10 years, planning and modeling this new Terminal 2, which is the one you're seeing going down to the left in this picture. It's a pretty beautiful. I flew to Vienna from here last night. It's nice, and they are sitting together. And this was client initiatives. And you can talk a lot about the different aspects of this. Of course, it's not super simple to use OpenBIM, IFC exchange. The engineers are using Tekla, the architects are using Revit. There are some issues of this because you always have some kind of information loss when you're doing the exchange via IFC. But it opens up a lot of positive effects also. And the client is very interested in this. Client has, the Avinor client has invested a lot in using the IFC files on the project for gaming industry. So they're creating games for the people working. There are 22,000 people working in the airport, and they are all required to go through this game of solving tasks inside the model on their iPads or their laptops or whatever. And this is also all coming from, this is here you can see who has the most points solving problems inside the game. And this is all coming from IFC files, from the architect, from the engineer, and also, of course, modeled by gaming developers, putting in people and interaction, and also psychologists. So I kind of like this approach. And this is a picture I took on Monday. On Monday, I went to their office, and this is all the BIM managers on the project, and they are learning Dynamo. So I taught them Dynamo on Monday in their project location. Everyone is looking happy except the engineer, who is the Tekla guy. Building information modeling is becoming important also in construction. The contractors, so I would say that the way that my country went into BIM is coming from different sides. The client ownerships, the state owns a lot of property in Norway, and they are demanding BIM. The airport is demanding BIM, but it's also coming from single humans, like Lars, the architect who was doing the barcode. And now the contractors are coming. And the reason why I'm showing you this project is the contractor here is asking for models for constructing a building like this. It's a hydroelectric power plant called Vamma 12 in Østfold in Norway, where like huge amounts, millions of liters of water are going to pass through these tubes and generate electricity every day. And when water moves in concrete, water has an issue with 90-degree angles. So water wants to have a smooth flow, right? This is hydrodynamics. And all this like bent, curved, and double-curved concrete needs to have reinforcement in it. And the contractor is asking the engineers, can you give us IFC models of the rebar? So the engineers Christopher and the other guys at Norconsult, they are using Dynamo to create all this complex rebar, and then sending IFC models to the contractor, who is uploading IFC files to their web servers for ordering the rebar, and then using Navisworks and Solibri to see where the rebar goes. Everything digitally, no drawings, no bending schedules. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a pretty big, it's a huge scale project also, and the people who are doing this now, they are traveling from place to place and talking about this because it's completely new. It's an extreme positive financial reward for the contractor also, not having to manage so many drawings and just get this model. And on a completely different aspect again, the state of Norway have started demanding BIM in architectural design and competitions. And this was like 2016 was marked by a couple of big events. You had the Donald Trump in US, and then you had the state demanding IFC on design competitions in Norway. And every architect went completely crazy. But it's completely normal. And this is the first, Øystein Graffer actually here standing on the opera. He's the one responsible for this at Statsbygg. Specifying exactly what kind of requirements they're needing for competition entry. And on this project, which is the Viking Museum on Bygdøya outside Oslo, a competition we sadly lost. I worked on the creation of BIM on this project for Snøhetta, but we lost. Another company won. I think it's actually quite nice. It's an existing building, which is a cross, and then this like snake, Viking-like snake around it. And this, what you're seeing here, is the traditional entry of a competition. It's a beautiful rendering and some sketches and schemes. And now for this, last year, this entry, they wanted BIM models. So the people winning this competition, and we had to submit IFC models that we uploaded to a web server that checked the models, checked if we have modeled all the rooms according to the room scheme, checked if we have all the exterior walls, all the interior walls, all the floors. If we hadn't, if I was missing one bathroom or meeting room, then I would just get a red message from the web server, your model is invalid. So we had to model, you know, and this is kind of, Statsbygg are using this to validate our idea. You can get a super nice impression from a rendering, but if the stuff behind it is just, yeah, we'll figure it out later. So they want to just filter out all the people who have not been thinking about the solutions. So this is just the images that Øystein sent me before I came here, like screenshots from Solibri and Excel, analyzing the different entries. And they even set up a room for the jury that has 4 screens and computers, so that the jury evaluating the different entries for the design competition can work with the models and use the data inside the models. I'm right now involved in the same thing a year after, because some terrorists blew up the government quarter in Oslo some years ago. I'm sure you remember. We're building a new one. It's a gigantic project, absolutely huge, and we are involved in this. I'm doing it right now, together with 3 of the biggest engineering companies in Norway and our biggest competitor. So Statsbygg is not only asking for BIM, but they are asking us to collaborate with our biggest competitor in Norway and 3 other engineering companies on a design competition. So this is interesting. And again, the openness of Snøhetta. So we invite the architects. So we have 4 or 5 competing architects in our office now every day, participating in all the lunch meetings, all the presentations, and participating in the office space. And then we are collaborating on developing this area, which is going to be the new government quarter and maybe the biggest project in Norway ever. So that's the perspective of BIM in Norway. That's the perspective of both the personal initiatives and the state initiatives. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means, or how do we approach BIM in Snøhetta. And I'm going to do that using 2 examples. One is the new Le Monde headquarters in Paris, France, that has a shape of a bridge and a couple of sphere cuts into something that used to be a very rectangular shape. We normally work with this, like shapes like you would work with clay, and use Boolean operations in Rhino. So you make some kind of bridge or box or whatever, and then you twist it, turn it, and make it into a more interesting shape than just a box. So in this case, it's very easy to make the story that Le Monde in French, in English it means the world, the globe. So we're making these globe cuts into the normal shape, and then you end up with something that's irregular. We're working with this back and forth in different shapes, and we also 3D print and produce models of all the different shapes, so you can have like a feeling of what's the pros and cons of different options. And landed in the final stages on a shape that has 2 tilted facades, 3 straight facades, 1 double curved facade, which is the one you're seeing in the front, the sphere cut, and 1 conical facade, a tilted cone actually. That's pretty complex on the far left side. I think it's so complex to deal with, when I do screenshots, I try to hide it in the back of the other facades. So at the same time, on top of this quite complex building, we have very rational horizontal floors and a uniform, almost like human skin of glass panels. And I think it was my second day at Snøhetta when the lead architect on this project asked me, can you make the skin in Revit, please? And I was thinking it was impossible. I'm going to do a presentation later today after lunch on the details of how this was developed, but it's a pretty cool project. So what we did is we started developing scripts, Grasshopper scripts, Dynamo scripts to develop the facade, because no out-of-the-box tool in Revit or Archicad or whatever CAD could make this facade according to the rules that we wanted it to be, both in terms of how it looks, how it works for the people on the inside, and the logic of the randomness in the skin. Because you cannot have 20,000 separate panels. Well, you can, but it's quite expensive. So we're working with these visual programming techniques that I'm going to touch on later in the afternoon. And worked in a cross-disciplinary building information modeling environment with the local architects, Unsere architects in Paris, the structural engineers, Kefren. Some of these people had never used BIM before, so we were traveling down to Paris and showing them the model and showing them how much easier it is to understand the design when you have a 3D space and a database to read it from, instead of AutoCAD LT drawings and Excel spreadsheets. And even the owner of Snøhetta, Kjetil, he went down. I recorded this video for him. He went down and he showed this to the client and the architects and said, we need to do this. Especially when you have double curved walls, it's extremely difficult to document in 2D. So this is basically sections that you're seeing. You're seeing the outer skin and the inner shape. It looks like a boat. And then with the local architects taking over the interior, we took the facade and developed the facade in Revit, using also Grasshopper and Rhino. And then we could use the programs that we wanted to have like this collaborative 3D environment in Revit, and also basically just simple things like coordinating between the floors and the outer skin panels, making sure that they are in the same place is super important for us to be able to build something like this. Right these days, we are sending out the Revit model as a contractual document. So there are 20,005 glass panels on this outer skin, all randomized with Dynamo, with different kinds of materials in different positions, but still just something between 25 and 50 types of combinations between the glasses. It's 10 materials combined in 100 different ways, but it's very logic. So the contractors are going to receive Revit models, and they're going to build this building from the Revit model with all the information that's in there. Yeah, maybe it will look something like this. It's right next to Gare d'Austerlitz in Paris, if you want to go. There's a mock-up being built of the facade there right now. So if some of you are going there, I wish that I could go. I want to go there and see the mock-up of the facade along the river. The last project I'm going to talk about before we move on is very close to my heart. I started working on this project 2 months ago, It's a bank. It's Banque Liban Français in Lebanon, in Beirut, in Lebanon. I'm working with a team of young people at Snøhetta who have never used Revit before. One of them used it a little bit, but the other people, no. And I'm starting to see this pattern of my career, basically, going from 2003. And I personally have been working a lot with people who have not been using Revit, so I use a lot of energy to teach people how to do this. The bank is a cool client. They are, as I said, located in Beirut. In Lebanon, 1 out of 5 people is a Syrian refugee. They have challenges with homeless people and poverty that we cannot even imagine. And still they approached Snøhetta to build this bank because they wanted public space. On the ground floor of this bank, the bank is going to look solid. I'm sure you can see it. It's a stone facade, it has a pattern, but it's going to look solid. There's going to be cuts in the solidness, but the bank wants to look solid. But at the same time, they want to keep this balance of having a solidness, but keeping it open. So on the ground floor, which is kind of hard to see on this picture, but there's going to be a public space around the entrance. There's a public stair where people can be. And on top of the stairs, there's going to be a public cafe where people, everyone in the society can come and be and enjoy a cup of coffee. And there's even going to be, we're planning on having a kindergarten on the 2nd level of the bank. So these people are really want to be a front runner of society of Beirut, to show the people of Lebanon how you can create also public space and not just big walls, locked doors and fences. And there's another interesting story about this project, and that is that we hosted a 2-day workshop with the client. Raya, the owner of the bank, flew to Norway together with Nabil Ghulam, the architect, Bureau Happold engineers, and also the architects representing the bank and the facility manager representing the bank. And we did a workshop, and they came there. And I had this crazy idea that we wanted to do the VR headsets, we wanted to do, the gaming engine and everything digital, and we were going to be inside the models and doing changes. And then we decided to do it completely different, moving back completely to the analog world. We built this digital prototype inside Revit. The facade is coming from Rhino and Grasshopper. I'm automating the scripting of the facade stones with Dynamo into Revit. But other than that, it's a Revit model that's consistent, good solutions, and looks good and beautiful. I think this word beautiful is highly underrated among the people trying to convince architects to use BIM, because a lot of BIM I've seen is ugly. And if you want to convince architects that working in a 3-dimensional database is good, you have to make it look good. So I'm spending some time teaching my friends at Snøhetta how to make a facade look good in Revit, using depth clipping and stuff like tiling the drawings on the same place, easy play with shadows, and not putting too much information into something like this. And wow, where did you go? There you are. Yeah, and stuff like this also, simple GIF, just showing how all the floors look on the same plan and having a perspective view with the section box inside Revit right next to it. It's a very simple thing to do in Revit, and it looks good, and the client looks at it and goes through I'm sure you all did this, but it's like, it creates a very good understanding of the building, and at the same time it looks good. We also created, I let one of the project managers go completely crazy with a camera tool in Revit and just creating all these perspectives everywhere. But I showed him also how to use the view template so that all the perspectives have the same visibility settings. A little bit of play with sketchy lines, some shadows, and then putting some entourage into the model. Not too much, but a little bit to create this underlay of the workshops, which was about creating stories. The background for the workshop that we did, it's a couple of weeks ago now, was to create stories of the people working in the bank and the people going to the bank to do a commercial enterprise there. So we printed all these drawings, printed all these sections, printed all the facades and all the underlay, and then we just put them on the table and said, go wild. And then we divided the group into groups and started making stories. This is Nabil Ghulam, the owner of the Architect in Beirut, making a story with the backdrop, all the Revit perspectives, all the sections and elevations inside this database as a backdrop, an underlay of a completely manual, analog process of creating stories for the people who are working in the bank. This is Rob Manson, the director of engineering at Bureau Happold, cutting on a piece of paper like a kid in kindergarten. And Caroline and Gabriel from Beirut also doing the same, you know, placing all these. And I was reflecting on this because I've been working with Revit for many years. I never did this before. And I believe that this has happened before, a bunch of people getting together to create stories. But I don't know if they ever did it on a completely consistent one model database. One perspective, one section, and one plan is the same thing. There's no cheating, it's the same model. So everything that they are looking at when they are creating these stories is the same. And then, of course, after the workshop, we changed a lot of things, but I think that was, personally for me, that was very rewarding. And then in the end, we created these boards and created the stories and even gave the people the names. And this is a person going to the cafe. How does he feel? Is it raining? Is there a Syrian refugee bothering him or something like this? And then we presented it to the rest of the groups. And it was a beautiful thing. So, and this is actually the people after the workshop, all the guys. So I want to say finally, before we finish, that when you're working with BIM, you have people and computers. If you forget about the people, you will not succeed. So, and that's all I want to say. I hope you enjoy. I hope I see some of you guys later in my Dynamo Nerd session. And I believe that's it from me. Thank you.